Welcome back to the Vidyashilp EdCast, everyone. Today we have Design in Focus. We have as guest speakers with us Chinar Shah and Upendra Vaddadi. Welcome to the EdCast, both of you. Chinar is an artist based in Bangalore. She did her bachelor's and master's in literature and went on to do a second master's in photography and now looks at her screen as an investigative site. Upendra did his bachelor's in industrial design and a master's in integrated design, and both of them work at Vidyashilp University as adjunct faculty in the School of Liberal Arts and Design Studies. Once again, a very warm welcome and thank you for joining, both of you. Chinar, if I may start with you, coming from the art space, where does the passion for teaching come from? You're an artist primarily, and as we read in your bio, where does this passion for teaching come from? What is it about? How do you connect your art practice and teaching?
I think as soon as I graduated, I started teaching, and it just so happened that I was ushered into that profession, and I've realized that teaching is also a practice as much as being an artist is a practice, and they both feed into each other. They are not isolated from each other. And I think I have grown exponentially as an artist because I teach, and vice versa. So I absolutely am convinced that now teaching is very much part of my practice, and I think through teaching a lot as a way of being an artist, writer, editor, a whole bunch of things.
Right. A similar question for you to start with, Upendra. Where does this passion for teaching come from? What kind of practice and pedagogy do you bring from the industry to academics?
I think my answer is also similar to Chinna's, where I think I feel like the applied practice that I have outside and the teaching practice are kind of inform each other. And passion for teaching, I think I just got kind of interested in it because while I was doing my master's, I had to do a teaching assistance and things like that, and kind of just naturally happened. And for me, it always felt like as an extension of my applied design practice, as a way of bringing my practice into the classroom. But then, like Chinar said, it's also about what happens in the classroom, like in terms of peer learning, that informs my practice. So I feel it's quite interlinked and part of each other.
Right. So has your design, your practice of design evolved as a result of the classroom teaching? If you could just speak a bit about it.
In terms of, I'm not sure exactly how specifically it would have happened, but in many indirect ways, because a lot of times people think, okay, like someone's coming to teach in a classroom as a result of certain expertise, things like that. But I also feel like the classroom is a space for kind of pure learning, right? So even where as an educator, as a facilitator, you're also like taking back some learning, and it's not necessarily a one directional kind of instructional space, but it's a kind of two directional space where you also have lots to kind of learn from the process of teaching and sharing knowledge, or in the process of putting together certain resources or material. There's also a lot of learning that happens over there.
Right, and of course, having been in the industry space, but also the design space as a student and as a faculty member, of course, there is a clear linking between your practice, your growth, your trajectory. But for Chinar, because you practice as an artist, I wonder what the design space means to you, how you look at it, and what is your perspective on it, and how your practice fits into that space.
Of course, design as a discourse has a very specific way of thinking. We talk about design thinking, design processes, and both design process and design thinking follows a certain trajectory which involves a certain amount of empathizing with your users, working with research, and thinking about thinking through various techniques of research to understand what the user would require, and then actually eventually design for that. This research process has to be very rigorous and to be able to actually finally come up with various thinking processes also. But artistic process is slightly different from this. It's not so linear coherent. I understand that design process doesn't need to be also linear coherent, but as an artist, you don't necessarily think about something outside of you. You think about it from a very inner perspective. It's very intuitive. You make while you think. So this process, because it's a very different process, and it also fosters a level of creativity. I think both of them really complement each other when you do need to do the research, the rigorous research to figure out a design process for yourself. But the ideas don't come just naturally, or this process doesn't necessarily facilitate idea generation. You do need to fall back on various other processes, and artistic process is one such process to fall back on for like creative thinking and creative work, which then feeds into a level of design thinking, design research, design iterations. So I think this is where I come in to think about these two various and very different processes, but like to think about, okay, how do we now, merge them and create something with it.
Right. So just actually carrying forward from there, we already touched upon design thinking and, the space. I've been actually thinking about how design has created this very undeniable niche for itself in the higher education space over the last few decades, I'd say. And Upendra, you've been in this space, as a student and as a faculty member. So do you see the spaces changing? What do you think sort of enabled design to create this niche for itself? It's rather undeniable. It's not just a way, it's not just a discipline anymore, I think. It's also a way of thinking. We're also implementing it as a way of thinking, like design thinking and so on. So how do you think the space has been changing, how the discipline has been changing, and what contributes to it becoming a way of thinking?
Not exactly sure, but I've definitely seen it change over the years from like being like a design school aspirant to then actually enrolling to design school, and then many years later like teaching at design schools. And I've definitely seen the perception of design education change. For instance, when I was like applying for design schools, or when I was a student at a design school, like the general perception was quite limited. They thought design was only something like fashion design or interior design, and no one really understood what interaction design or industrial design or graphic design and things like those mean. But now there's more just literacy and awareness regarding what these fields are, and I'm not quite sure where this is coming from. This could also be like more receptiveness from your larger universities to kind of setting up design programs and design schools. But also I think like just students being exposed to maybe things like design during their high school times, right? Because when I was in high school, this was not something that was really exposed to us, and a lot of us were kind of had to discover this independently. Whereas now I feel like even K-12 education has changed quite a bit, where design is being kind of brought in as a subject, and maybe that's one way of, or that's in one way responsible for sort of like increasing this awareness and literacy about design education.
Right.
And just to add to what he's saying, it's also these boundaries are now like were always blur, like say fashion design or graphic design and so on and so forth. But I think the blur is becoming even more like pronounced as the time passes, because we are truly looking at an education system that is transdisciplinary, and it will have to be transdisciplinary. And as we like individual disciplines interact with other disciplines, these like very strict understanding of what say like a graphic design is or what communication design is will also become we will have to kind of like evolve with other discipline and in conversation with other disciplines. And that's what I think, that is the change probably in all of these years of design education.
Right. So that brings to mind the role of technology. One can see that technology has been playing a role in this evolution of design as a discipline, as a way of thinking, and so on. So could you reflect, both of you? For you, perhaps in the art space, how has technology impacted, and overall in the design space, its perception, how it's done, how it's perceived? Has technology played a role in this evolution?
Like, I don't think they're very two parallel or inseparable things. In fact, like design is very tied to technology and the evolution of technology, because even design design of course is kind of intrinsic to human life, right? Right now we kind of look at it as a discipline or as a profession and as a way of doing things in terms of practice, but design as an activity is something that is intrinsic to human life, right? In terms of like us organizing our things or way of going about life, like just generally design as a kind of human, how to put it, I mean, it is kind of intrinsic to human life, right, as a way of thinking. But if you're talking about design as a discipline, it is very tied to technology, right? Specifically, or especially the Industrial Revolution, because post-Industrial Revolution, or around the time the Industrial Revolution was happening, was when design education as a kind of a formal subject, or in terms of design schools popping up as like formalized schools as centers for learning design popped up, right? And so of course, like design education has always been about how to kind of deal with the technology that is happening currently and its evolution, and how we can use that for the betterment of human lives, right, in some way, or in some ways also be critical of technological evolution that's happening and still kind of provide or design solutions for better human life in some ways.
Right. Do you also reflect on technology and its impact, Chinar? I mean, does it impact artistic practice in any way? Do you use it?
I like Upendra. I also think that it's not so disconnected. They all go hand in hand. And right now, sometimes when we think of technology, of course, we think of new media tools, so on and so forth as technology. But design from the very beginning, if we think of like say charkha, that's a technology to to be used, like that was used all these years back in textile. Looms, that was like another technology. So we have in fact been very much part of building technology. Designers have been part of building technologies. We work continuously with and alongside people who design, whether it's software, hardware, so on and so forth, in all the fields of design. So the one doesn't have to think of the computer as the only site of technology. There are many sites of technology. This glass right now, people were making glasses for maybe 1,000 years back also. There was a technology involved in making of the glass, and if it has changed right now, that's also an intervention of a designer only to have changed, because we know that maybe that glass didn't work, and so we need to have a new way of drinking or something like that, the chair for that matter, and so on and so forth. So, and in terms of art, my personal work is very much looking at technology very critically, thinking about the screen, thinking about the kind of life we live, and not necessarily as something outside of us. Oh, there's a real life outside of the screen, and then the screen is this facade. I think I look at the screen as an extension of our life, and then I try to understand, critically respond to our lived realities, both on the screen, offline, and respond to various technologies involved in it, such as the surveillance cameras and our use of e-commerce websites and so on and so forth. That's the focus in my own practice, is to just reflect on all kinds of technologies around you, specific to vision, how we view the world.
Right. So that actually brings to mind something that I've been actually thinking about in terms of higher education in general as well. We say we want higher education to fuel social change. We want it to fuel progressive, constructive, productive, positive social change. And of course, the way you spoke about art, this art is for social change. This art is for at least helping the society reflect better on its ways of being, on the trajectories that it's taking, so on and so forth. So a design graduate, right? What should a design program, a BDES graduate, look forward to? Like, what kind of roles can they take up in the society? I'm not saying only the job market in particular, but in the society in general, as they graduate from this program.
You asked a two-fold question. The question about social change and being responsible citizen, probably, or designers out there. What we can do, I think what the aim of any education institution is to make students thinking beings, not to tell them what that changes, because we don't even know what society is going to look like, what tomorrow's world is going to look like, and therefore what change should look like. But can we learn to critically engage with the world we occupy, to then also be able to make informed decisions about the kind of world we want to build? So that's one, which is what the purpose of, I think, education is, and
Definitely.
the purpose here also is that to be thinking individuals, and what kind of and therefore when one goes out there, so to speak, in the world, I think we are surrounded by everything. We are surrounded by all kinds of visuals at this point of time, whether it's in video forms, it's in moving form, it's in static form. What kind of designers are we creating in this world is a question that as faculty members probably we ask ourselves. And then to think about, it's not only about creating very skilled individuals who are great desktop operators, because today's technology or today's world would not be the same as what will happen tomorrow. And one has to adapt to the changing world, the changing requirements of the market, technology. So it's not about being skilled at this point of time, but it's about being able to adapt to what is to come, and which is the purpose, I think, of this education here in design. If you are a thinking being and know and have the tools to respond to the world around you, then you would be able to adapt to, say, what is to happen 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line. And learning of the skills will happen simultaneously.
No, I agree. This also I think brings up two things. One is, of course, the adapting thing that you're talking about, has again to do with your previous question of this, how technology impacts our practices and vice versa. And one is, of course, this aspect of what Chinar mentioned, where designers have also been a part of designing technology. But on the other hand, it's also for us as educators about not to teach a particular software or a tool or technique, although we do introduce that, but also about kind of introducing a mode of thinking, and kind of these fundamentals of design, which irrespective of technology will kind of still continue, because tools will keep changing when kind of technology evolves. For instance, if you're looking at typography, right? The fundamentals of typography still remain the same, but say 100 years ago, someone was using blocks, and to kind of typeset a document, but now you have a screen-based interface to do that. And but the fundamentals of how you typeset something to make something readable or to make something nicely communicated, that doesn't change. So that's one instance. And the other aspect is of also, again, agree with what Chinar was saying, is our role is also to kind of inculcate a certain way of thinking, and not necessarily to, or the way I see it is not to kind of prescribe a way of implementing social change or things like that, but to kind of at least equip them with this food for thought, or this maybe some certain methods or techniques to how to go about thinking like this. And in terms of this job market question, I think that's also an interesting thing, because of course, again, as facilitators or as educators, we can't be necessarily prescribing what path one takes, and because we also at some level need to be kind of tied to what economic realities and things like that are. But at the same time, it's also to kind of make them critical of what the kind of world is asking for in terms of practitioners, right? Because one might seem very swayed by, this idea of just being a desktop operator, but how do we kind of also challenge these notions, right? And I think earlier you were talking about, or you were asking me about UI, UX and interaction design, and I think my position also kind of similar to that of Chinar's, because of course there's this growing demand for UX, UI designers these days, right? But it would be kind of redundant for us to teach students what jobs are there right now, but rather kind of introduce them to a way of thinking so that they're also prepared for what's happening 10 years, 20 years down the line, right? Because already, as we're seeing it, automation is kind of replacing a lot of the kind of laborious or the applied kind of work, and so we need more thinking based skills as well. And another thing is also to be kind of critical of these things as designers, right? And not necessarily like be skilled enough to design something that's pretty and usable and user friendly. In fact, this aspect of what is user friendly is also something that I've been critically questioning or asking my students to question, right? What is a user friendly interface, or what constitutes that? Is it
And
something,
who is the user?
and who is the user, right? Or even this idea of sometimes saying something is user centric, I feel is problematic in many ways, because it does kind of reduce like a human to the role of a user or a consumer, right? Whereas when we're designing, we want to be designing with the approach that we're designing for like fellow humans, and not necessarily like someone who's subject to a certain
Category.
category.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given that, then what qualities do you look for in a design aspirant? What skills, or like you said, we are not giving them, we're not preaching a direction. We are not saying you must do this, or these are the areas where you must go into, but we are giving them proficiencies. Maybe we could call them proficiencies, right? Not even a skill set. Even the requirement of skills changes. Skills become obsolete, and new skills are required. It's a really ever-changing, fast-changing world that we live in. Technology evolves, everything evolves. Skills needed change. We no longer need to know how to drive a manual gear shift car anymore. So a person learning to drive a car today will never know what a manual gear shift car feels like. They would only have learned to drive on an automatic car. But is that skill obsolete? Is that an unnecessary skill, a vestigial organ that we needed to shed, etc.? Is a question up in the air. I mean, sometimes I feel, how is it that the next generation will not know how to do this? That sometimes appalls me. But for a design aspirant, what are these proficiencies then that we build? We are not just simply giving them, we are not preaching a direction, obviously. We are also not giving them a certain skill set, because they will need to adapt that skill set. They can't just stay fixated on a particular skill set. It's going to evolve. So we need them to be adaptable. So could you list some proficiencies that we build in such a student?
I mean, we do teach. It's a skill set, skill development is very much part of the curriculum, actually, but that's not the
end game.
Yeah, the end result of all of this. In terms of the aspirants, I think, to me at least, I don't know what you feel about it, but one is to come with an open mind to learn. Because there's so much unlearning happens, it can be very unsettling at some point especially the first year can be very unsettling. And when one says open mind, that's also a very broad category. What does that mean? You don't know. But just keep this in mind that at various points of time, you may have to, apply this open-mindedness to be able to receive what is there to be offered. But at the same time, I think one requires immense amount of rigor, immense amount of hard work. I don't think so. I mean, I think people sometimes think that, okay, we are going to go into design or liberal arts and all of that. That doesn't require a lot of work. Actually, I think you have to work as hard as a doctor, whoever is like studying to be a doctor. I think we all worked that hard to be where we are, and there is no, you have to be very, very rigorous. That's the best. If you are rigorous, then we are here to kind of then take you through. Yeah.
Definitely. No, I agree, because again, like going back to the skills question, it's not like there's no skills involved. It is in fact a very skill-based thing, because art or design is, a lot of it is about craftsmanship, right? And craftsmanship is something that requires rigor. It's irrelevant. It's regardless of the fact if, like a certain technology or tool is going to become obsolete, but it still needs a rigor in the sense to be able to kind of adapt to whatever the next version of that tool or technology is going to be. And that needs certain sense of commitment, which is, and the readiness for that commitment is something I feel like that we look for in design aspirants, and generally this kind of open mind to, or this aptitude to be able to unlearn or just adapt to whatever's there, and to also kind of break free of certain conventional ways of thinking and be open to kind of learning, or be kind of corrected in your way of thinking, or know that this is something that I have gone by all my life, but it's time to question that. And
Right. So I was wondering how the curriculum actually equips students to do that, because I think a curriculum needs to actually do a tightrope walk between, learning the fundamentals, teaching the fundamentals of a discipline, but also keep the students adaptable to the changes happening in the discipline, in the world at large, etc. So how does the curriculum, the design program at VU equip students to do that? What kind of courses give them an opportunity to perhaps have some hands-on learning, some live projects?
So we have essentially integrative studio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, they are very rigorous studio-based projects and programs where students are expected to work at various levels. It can be beginner, intermediate, or even advanced level, depending on which year they are at, to go through various kinds of studio practices with themes that complement the contemporary design pedagogy, to then that would equip them essentially in studio practice, and then, I mean, maybe you might be better equipped to talk about this, but I also think that there is a host of minor courses that the students get to choose from, which come from psychology, law, data, and there are a few other minors which actually are foundational to any design education. Definitely. Where they kind of like get these multidisciplinary understanding of the world, the education space, and apply learnings from each of these. So it's a very complex curriculum that we kind of like, I think, work with.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that helps because a lot of times design students see design as a very kind of isolated practice where they don't necessarily need to engage with things from like or subjects from humanities or engineering and things like that. And that's why also a lot of aspirants look at design as an easy way out, because where they feel like, oh, they can be creative and just do whatever they want and not really deal with like the rigor that like sciences or humanities require. But I mean, I think that's why it's kind of an interesting space, because they are kind of exposed to these different subjects through their minors and the university course, and that kind of helps them get a kind of well-rounded view of what's happening, because design also does not function in isolation, right? In the real world, like art or design, it is kind of inherently like very like tied to like what are politics and like socio-economic realities of life. So it's important to not kind of lose sight of that, and that's why I think these kind of cores and minors help with that. And in terms of the design program itself, like it's so structured in a way, I think that the first year is kind of includes some sense of like fundamentals of design, like say composition and color and things like that, but also certain kind of courses that aid in this kind of thinking or unlearning, right? Or kind of artistic modes of thinking, which is very important to design. Although people might say, oh, design has nothing to do with art. But I personally, as a practitioner, for me, artistic modes of thinking, this kind of non-lateral thing is very, very essential to kind of ideate and come up with sort of a well-rounded idea for a project, right? So these kinds of thinking and all is something that is important for like foundational or like the first year of the program. And I mean, and the studios, of course, like are very important spaces, like the integrative studios, because they're not only like focused on a certain skill, but they're also contextual spaces where you could experiment with different kind of specializations or tools and in a contextual space in terms of a project, like whether it's like more of a museum and gallery practice, or whether it's to do with like film and animation and things like that. And think after that, like in the third and fourth year, the specialization tracks are also kind of interesting spaces for then the students to kind of develop or really shape what they're kind of interested in building.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask you next. So what are the specialization tracks that students can take up, and how that feeds into the roles that they can perform in society? I'm not saying marked out or boxed out roles, but how they contribute to the society at large. So what are the specialization tracks available to them, and what are the avenues open through those tracks?
I mean, so since this is primarily a communication design program, right? Because whereas another design school might have also other sorts of design programs, ours is a communication design only program. And within this, the kind of specialization tracks that we've sort of come up with are structured in a way that they're broad enough, so to not sort of box them into something, but at the same time they're kind of specific enough, right? So right now what we have are 3 specialization tracks, one being film
Interaction
and
design, film and animation, and graphic design.
and graphic design, right? Yeah. So, and these are kind of might seem like very like specialized tracks, which they are, but at the same time they're broad enough for someone to kind of develop a practice around them, right? For instance, like film and animation or film and video might look at just how someone might use moving image as part of their practice, right? So they might either want to take up filmmaking in a with a camera, or they might want to work with like more like camera less methods of film, right? Whether that be like through kind of animation or more like digital animation or analog animation, or just generally
Or
work
creating
with,
your own camera.
yeah, or just generally working with like moving image as part of your practice, right? I think you more equipped to speak about this than I am.
But
Whereas graphic design, again, someone might think, oh, it's only about like, you know, like designing a poster or something like that. But graphic design could mean many things, right? It could kind of translate to a communication design using like graphic design as a practice, or like, you know, for information arts, information design, or like publication and editorial design. It could, I mean, graphic design is quite a broad category by itself. And in terms of interaction design, it's also called interaction design and not necessarily UX UI, because UX UI is also a very reductive term, like I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
Whereas interaction design kind of covers the broad spectrum, where you're not just looking at necessarily screen-based design, but kind of interactions are all around us, right? Like interfaces and experiences are something that we all as humans interact with, whether it's like, you know, pushing a door handle, or, you know, like working with another tangible object. So these kind of interfaces and interaction are not limited to screens. So I think the interaction design is also specialization tracks also introducing them to the idea that, you know, it's, you don't necessarily need to be just designing apps and websites. There's also a lot more that you could be designing as.
and this is like introduced from 3rd year. So by then students are also equipped to work on their own independent projects. We help them like slowly find their own voice from smaller projects to then like actually a whole semester long project. So it's a process that actually the whole pedagogy and the curriculum follows to help students find their voice, their own style of making, doing, thinking, to then create and work with these projects of their own.
Right. And of course, given the overall VU structure, there's also the capstone project at the end, which also encourages, I think, we'd like to call it multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary thinking, where they actually go out in the industry and find a project that they want to do and actually deliver that. So semesters 7 and 8 are actually sort of devoted to that. They have very few other classes or stuff like that. So I think this entire process is preparing the student to be able to, even the studios are preparing the student for this process, where they really are able to see something that they would want to create, challenge, recreate in the world around them, and then deliver that, work on that as their capstone or something. So for me, the takeaway really from this conversation has been how design is not simply about producing something, or just, it is about production, but it's not about just production in a given way, etc., but also challenging the ways and the techniques and the technologies through which we produce them, and the impact on them on the society, on everything in the society at large, not just jobs, not just social relationships, but social change, so on and so forth. Maybe just one line from each of you that you would like to say as a message for design aspirants.
It's a process, and be open to that process.
No, I agree. Just be open, embrace this process of unlearning.
Okay, so here's to embracing the process of learning and unlearning, and not blindly taking in whatever we are offered, but challenging it critically, thoughtfully, reflecting on our techniques. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Thanks, Chinar and Upendra, for joining.
Thank you.